Now, the BuckeyeXtra podcast with Joey Kaufman and Rob Oller from the Columbus Dispatch.
Welcome back, listeners. It's the BuckeyeXtra football podcast. It's Monday, December 8th. I'm Joey Kaufman, joined by Rob Oller. We learned a lot about Ohio State over the weekend. They played the Big Ten title game. They lost to Indiana. The perfect season is no more. And then on Sunday, they found out their seed in the college football playoff. The Buckeyes didn't drop all that much, just flip-flop with Indiana. They're the 2 seed in the playoff. They will play in the Cotton Bowl on New Year's Eve with the winner of Texas A&M, the 7th seed, and Miami, the 10th seed, to meet them at Jerry World on December 31st. So a 3.5-week layoff before we see the Buckeyes again. I think it was probably only a mild surprise that they stayed at number 2. Thought maybe they could fall to 3. But really, I think we kind of knew they were going to have a bye, and now we learned maybe what the matchup will be.
Yeah, I didn't have, more I thought about it, I didn't have too much problem with the way the committee all the way through. I've always been a big head-to-head matters, and I've been that if you make the Big Ten, I know we may disagree on this, if you make your championship game, that you shouldn't be punished as severely if you lose it. And the reason I look at that, and this relates to Ohio State not dropping behind Georgia, only dropping to number 2. First of all, it was 1 versus 2. It was a close game. It was essentially in the backyard of Indiana. I don't know. I think we figured it was like a 60-40 split, more Hoosiers fans. But you didn't get punished for losing that game maybe as much as some people thought. I went back and forth wondering if Georgia would jump Ohio State, and I think it's right. I think Indiana should be 1, Ohio State 2, Georgia 3. So in terms of just the rankings and the job that the committee did, even with Notre Dame, I guess, that's an odd one. I give a thumbs up, and usually I'm pretty critical of the committee, but yeah, we can look ahead, but be focused just a little bit on the IU game, what went right, what went wrong, and all the subplots with Brian Hartline and the poor Jaden Fielding. I can't even get his name right now. Oh gosh, that poor guy. He misses the kick, and I call him Caden. Kickers get no respect. They're on an island. They're on an island, and he's taking a lot of heat. Do feel for the kid.
You're still thinking of Caden Curry's wild start to that game where he played
which was pretty amazing. That fell through the cracks. That was one of the games. He played a hell of a game, and
right in his backyard there in Indianapolis.
Yeah, he just kind of, he was on it, and the defense ultimately, I was thinking of writing this, kind of getting overlooked as the defense did its job. It gave up 13 points to it, 30 points fewer than what Indiana was averaging, and I think I saw some stat of fewer points than they've scored in the last 2 seasons, something like that. So this wasn't a defensive hiccup for Ohio State. This was an offensive hiccup.
Yeah, and the Big Ten title game was, I think, notable this year in terms of just being a barometer for where Ohio State is and where Indiana is going into the playoff. It was sort of going to define them and the narratives around them going into the postseason, because it wasn't going to have a big practical effect on them. They could get a trophy for the trophy case, but in terms of their seeding for the playoff and their ability to win a national championship, it doesn't do a whole lot. Ohio State may face the 7th seed instead of the 8th or 9th seed in the quarterfinals. It doesn't, I think, change the roadmap all that much, but I think it does in a big way, I think, highlight some concerns you have with the offense. We've talked about it at times throughout this season, just their inability to finish drives in the red zone, especially the low red zone, and especially some of the short yardage situations, because that was, I think, the defining sequences from the Big Ten title game was Ohio State had 2 drives in the second half inside Indiana's 10-yard line and came away with no points. And there were times this year where even just the previous week at Michigan, they had the ball at the 3-yard line, took 6 plays, and they ultimately settled for a field goal. So this was not a wart that we had not seen on this team before. They just usually do enough other stuff with the big play and all that to sort of cover it up. And it was against a team like Indiana, it I think shows a little more.
Yeah. I got a text after the game from Doug Plank, who is former back in the 70s DB for the Buckeyes, and I've been communicating with him for another story, but he felt the need to text me after the Indiana game with his insight. And okay, he was also a coach in the Arena League, pretty successful. I'm just going to read some of this because this didn't really, I hadn't thought about this, and I'm going to get your take on it. The one thing that Ohio State has not really done much of is really throw the short passes or screens as much, which you would think might have worked against Indiana. Here's what he writes here is Ohio State should have schemed more QB run pass options on plays by rolling out the QB. Okay, whatever. Ohio State had inconsistent interior blocking. Well, there were 5 sacks. Run backfield motion to determine coverages and blitzes. That's kind of inside football stuff, whatever. Then he says, screens slow down the pass rush. A short passing game can subsidize a run game. Uh, I thought that was interesting. And more I thought about it, they don't really seem to have a lot of packages other than throwing to the tight ends, where it's sort of a short passing game. It feels like they throw downfield a lot because they can get separation with Smith and Tate. And they do run some slants, so I may just be I may be just barking up the wrong tree here. Maybe you can speak to some of that. Is that really, now that you hear that, a shorter passing game and some screens could have worked in the Indiana game?
So I think they've done a pretty good job of working in some of the short intermediary stuff throughout this year because I think for a long time the knock on Sayin was he was a check down artist, if you will. And
Mm.
in the Michigan game, Bo Jackson was their second leading receiver with 4 catches. So they did use him in the passing game. It felt like maybe they were better in that situation of working in some of the shorter stuff. And certainly I think at times in the red zone they could be better at that because they tried to just kind of ram it in some short yardage situations against Indiana.
Yeah, I mean, the red zone's been an issue. Um, it was an issue in the goal line stand that Michigan had against Ohio State, that ended up in a field goal. And it was an issue. They were what, twice inside the 10-yard line?
Yeah, they had the ball at the 9-yard line and the 5-yard line, and both of those drives died without any points.
Right. And that just can't happen. So is that play calling, which leads to who was calling the plays against Indiana? Was it Brian Hartline, who's, as we record this, is about to an hour or so away from his opening press conference at the University of South Florida, where he's now the head coach, having left Ohio, quote, left Ohio State, because he's staying with the Buckeyes through however far they go in the playoff. But and in a role where he's still going to be calling the plays, according to Ryan Day. You wrote that story today.
Yeah,
Um,
and he said he called.
so
And Day said Hartline did call the plays the Big Ten title game.
yeah, well, wouldn't you say that if nothing worked?
Well, Day also did say that uh, a lot of the stuff that they had in that game was worked on throughout the week. So they were some of their 2 or 3 tight end sets. That was part of the game plan that they had all put together during the week. So I think certainly the primary play caller has a lot of say and sway on what they pick on the call sheet. But I think a lot of folks have just been, and I would include myself in this, just been sort of puzzled at times why Ohio State had 13 personnel in the red zone and not having your two best wide receivers out there at the same time. But this was not a situation where the play caller is going rogue and Brian Hartline decided in the third quarter that he just wanted to do this all by himself. Things are done in tandem, and this was something they all kind of worked on. I think that to me is should not be lost in this whole discussion about some of the game management and the play calling, because I think it's probably the two situations on both of those drives which I think were head scratchers. There was the first time they got inside the 10, late third quarter, Ohio State's trailing 13-10, so a field goal ties it, a touchdown puts them ahead. It's 3rd and 1. This is before the sneak. They're in 13 personnel, 3 tight ends and 1 receiver. Or maybe it was just 12 personnel, but there's only 1 wide receiver on the field, and it's Jeremiah Smith on the left side, and it's a one-man route to him. And that was a sprint out was saying, and that was the only option on the play. I think that was just kind of, it made sense to be tight end heavy, to isolate Jeremiah Smith, but there was no other safety valve. But then you sneak it the next play, and it's short, and the sneaks have cost them in 2 straight weeks where it hasn't materialized. And then the next sequence, I think, is probably even more of the head scratcher than the first 3rd and short that they came up empty, was on the following series in the fourth quarter where they get to the 9-yard line, and instead of having any wide receivers in the field, it's 3 tight ends, another tight end in the backfield, Nate Roberts, who was lined up as a fullback. Sayan fakes the dive to him and rolls out and throws to Bennett Christian in the end zone. So I think that is probably the head scratcher to folks, is just you're throwing to Bennett Christian when the Big Ten title is on the line and not Jeremiah Smith or Cardinal Tate. But you probably do need a heavy tight end package to maybe get some of Indiana's big people on the field and try to sell the play action. So, and then you obviously had the Jaden Fielding kick after that. But in both those situations, 3rd and short, Carnell Tate was on the sideline, not on the field.
Yeah, which makes you wonder, how healthy was Tate or Smith? I asked Day on the his last presser that he had, how healthy are they? And he said if they needed to play 80 plays, they could have. I think something like that. So he didn't say they were like 100% healthy. It was like they're still kind of nicked up, but they're fine if they're only playing 50 plays, which almost makes it sound like a endurance, a capacity issue, like more than I don't know how that really factors in, like, or conditioning issue. But well, what's the difference between 80 and 60 if you've got your gimpy hamstring? You're just putting more stress on it, I guess, with those extra plays. Regardless, they weren't on the field. That was a head scratcher. I think you said something that resonates. A lot of times, these coaches during the week, they get in their windowless rooms and they work on things and they practice things, and they're maybe reticent to switch that up in the game. They worked on it. They're comfortable with it. They get in those situations and they go with it. And I think that's sometimes the difference between like really great game coaches and not, is kind of going on the fly. Like, yeah, we practice this at work, but is this what we need right now? It's having a feel for the game. And that's where it really intrigues me, the relationship between Day and Hartline and the other offensive coaches. How does that actually work? And it didn't work against Indiana. Let me step back and say this, because it would be remiss if we didn't say this, because it's kind of out there. I heard it after the game. It was like, how could we lose to Indiana? Ohio State fans were saying. I'm like, and some maybe in the media were thinking that, but I mean, Indiana's good. I mean, they were number 2. They're not a fraud. They have maybe the best coach right now in college football, though what he's done, Signetti. But this is a good team. Defensively, they're number 1. I think you mentioned this during the game. They're number 1 in red zone defense, and they're number 1 against the rush. And so, yeah, is the Big Ten the NFL? No. The Big Ten, I think, is kind of down. They look at the schedule, not great, but still, they're number one in the nation. So this wasn't like losing to Purdue or Iowa in 17-18.
No,
This was, I mean, this wasn't losing to Michigan in 2024 when they were unranked and 13-10. This was 13-10 against the number two team who's now number one.
yeah, I think in a lot of ways the comparisons to last year's Michigan loss undersells Indiana, and I think oversells the state of Ohio State's issues. So
Yeah,
that's something to.
I think there were some blemishes. I think even some of the players said the offensive line got exposed a little bit, which is interesting because it played its best game of the season, I would argue, against Michigan. So I find it hard to believe that Michigan's defensive line and defense is that bad that Ohio State, that problems with Ohio State's O line were masked against Michigan. I think it's possible just that Indiana is really good and Ohio State kind of laid an egg.
They had a good game plan. Ohio State talked a bit about just some of the stunts that Indiana was running and the different types of pressures they brought to really get after Julian Saint. I mean, he'd only been sacked 6 times in the regular season, sacked 5 times against Indiana. So their line did a great job of being creative as well to get to Saint. It wasn't just 4 guys rushing through their gaps. They were moving around and doing a lot of stuff that I think gave him some different stuff that he had to deal with that he really hadn't all season. I mean, that pocket against Michigan was clean. He could have spent a lot of time in there. I think you're right about though the perception of Indiana. It's just Indiana played Ohio State close last year, but it felt like Ohio State really was able to pull away late and just handle them at the line of scrimmage. Indiana held their own and more at the line in the trenches. I thought that was the biggest difference from where they were a year ago to hold Ohio State to its fewest rushing yards in a game since 2011. And part of that was due to the 5 sacks and those count against your rushing total. But still, they did a great job of not allowing a ton of big plays in the rushing game, getting after saying. Everybody kind of talked about Indiana as the Cinderella story of last year. The carrots didn't turn into a pumpkin; it turned into like a spaceship, I guess.
Wow, yeah.
Indiana's
Yeah.
like that. Indiana's they're for real as a program. I think they're going to be sort of. We talked about this on our drive back from Indianapolis. It feels like the way Penn State's trajectory has changed, Indiana has kind of moved in to that weight class because there's always some team in sort of the eastern half of the Big Ten, in addition to Ohio State, Michigan, that always is kind of with them. For in the 2010s when Mark D'Antonio had Michigan State going, they were sort of the thorn in Ohio State's side. And now it feels like Indiana has sort of become that third team in that Ohio State Michigan tier where they are the ones sort of punching those schools.
Yeah, and from a national viewpoint, I think I compared them a little bit or asked the question, are they sort of the new Clemson? Or going back a little farther for younger listeners, viewers here, the Kansas State under Bill Snyder, which like Kansas State came out of nowhere. It was a terrible program, and this guy Bill Snyder built them into a title contender. They never quite got there. And then once he left, they fell back. So I'm curious with Indiana. I mean, Kurt Cignetti's 64 years old. Does he have 10 more years in him? I doubt 10. I mean, how old was Saban? Like 73?
72, 73 when he retired.
Yeah, so I think Cignetti's got maybe 5 more years if he wants. I mean, it's again, Clemson was had some history, but not incredible history. And here's Indiana now on top of the world. And, how long will it last? I have a hard time believing that this is, they're going to be top five team for the next 10 or 20 years. But I don't think Hoosiers fans care about that. It's like, hey, we're here right now. Let's enjoy it. And they should.
Yeah, I mean, last night or 2 nights ago, I mean, that's the biggest moment in Indiana football history, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
First outright title since I think the 1940s, first Big Ten title of any claim since 1967 to go 13-0 to beat Ohio State, which they've not done since 1988. I mean, it's just an incredible achievement.
Yeah, and they deserve to win. I mean, they made the clutch plays when they had to. You kind of, if you've watched Big Ten football, it still was a little bit hard to be all in on the Hoosiers just because they were so bad for so long. You kept waiting for that one mistake that they would kind of fold. And instead, it went the other way. They made the big plays that Ohio State didn't. And that's why they won the game. Now you could argue Jaden Fielding, it goes to overtime maybe there, although Indiana still would have had a chance to come back. He misses the field goal, and on to the playoff, which
What did you think of the decision to
interesting.
kick a field goal there?
What?
What did you think of the decision to kick a field goal when it was 4th and 1? I mean, Jaden Fielding had not shown really any signs of missing from that range at all this year.
Yeah,
still in his
I
twice
think it,
all year, so his leg was good, but there was still not a ton of time left. They kicked that field goal with the at 2:48 or 2:50, 2 minutes and 51 seconds were left when they lined up for that 27-yard field goal attempt.
I did not have a problem. I think you have to get the 3 points, and you're kind of thinking this is a given three. It wasn't. Hindsight's 2020. Um, I think you got to look at how they had been doing. I mean, at some point, maybe they realized our short yardage, 4th and 1, it didn't work the last time. We've struggled a little bit. Did they clench up a little bit? Ryan Day's an interesting story when you look at play calling through the years. I think he's very aggressive until he's not. I just I'd love to do a deep dive and probably maybe we will on Ohio State's play calling in one score games, how they've done in one score games, since he's been the coach. That said, I did not have a problem. I think you go up 30, it's 13-13 with what you said, 250 left, and you have the number one defense in the nation. You figure you're going to stop Indiana, get it back, and maybe you kick a field goal again late or whatever. Didn't work out that way. That's sports.
Yeah, I've gone back and forth on this one. Part of me thinks that, look, you're playing for a game that really doesn't impact seeding. You're playing the Big Ten championship game. Just go for it and try to get a win. And I think what complicates it is even if they had kicked the field goal, it's 13-13, Indiana's ball with 2:48 left. They just got to go down and kick a field goal. I don't really think it's a guarantee you get the ball back. I think in a lot of ways you were just playing for overtime there, which is okay. Maybe you think you can win it in overtime, although that tends to be played on a shorter slice of the field. So maybe it's not a great format for them. I just think the way the time was in the game that it was a little bit wishful to think that you're going to get a stop that quickly, unless Indiana just sort of comes out and throws 3 incompletions or plays go out of bounds. I think it was just a lot to ask for to get that kind of turnaround. Maybe it would have happened. I think even if you get the first down, though, and here's where I think kicking a field goal does make sense, because even if you do sneak it and get a first down, it's 1st and goal at the 7-8 yard line. There's no guarantee you score a touchdown and that you get a new set of downs, but you still got to get in the end zone. And Indiana's defense had been so tough there that maybe you end up kicking the field goal later on anyway. So
Yeah, but there would have been less time on the clock. So I think
yeah,
I think
the first
if you
down is
go,
actually kind of interesting to me because you could have reset the game at 13-13 late in the third quarter.
yeah, right. That's what I'm saying. Interesting, kind of aggressive, not aggressive. What are you doing? I don't know. And that's the beauty of being able to nitpick this stuff.
And the other thing that's interesting is they continue to operate at a slower tempo and pace and methodically move down the field. Those 2 red zone trips really cost them because they were on back-to-back series in which they took combined 15 minutes of game clock. So not only are you not capitalizing on red zone opportunities, but you just ate up an entire quarter of the game to get nothing. They were trailing 13-10 when they had those two long drives and got nothing. So you're not also preserving time. The clock there is not your friend, and they have managed to play at a slow pace throughout this year. They think it's going to help them in terms of the load management, and there's less of a need for style points. And I get that, but when you're down in the second half and you were playing at that kind of pace, I think you are gambling a little bit because it's not a case where time is a luxury. Time is pressing in that situation, and to be that slow moving, I think you see the downside in that situation. And Dave's talked about that before, where you have to be efficient if you're going to play at that slow pace. But those plays really bite you more when you're playing, you're moving slower.
Now you're feeding the conspiracy theory beast, Joey, because
What's the
I've seen some conspiracy theories out there that Ohio State didn't care if they won this game. And what you're saying is, you know, they played this slower pace, fewer plays for load management all season, looking ahead, knowing they've got to save guys. It's a long season. And Ryan Day made a comment about soon, this was a month ago, that very soon you'll see us put the pedal to the metal and we're going to go. I assume that meant once the Big Ten championship game arrived and you're indoors and weather's not a factor, you were going to go. The fact that they didn't, that they played just pretty much identically pace-wise to what they've been doing makes you wonder, well, was this just sort of a game that is like a pride trophy game and they didn't really care and then they're waiting until the next game, which would be the Cotton Bowl, really to floor it? You're getting kind of late in the process there if you're waiting until then. And honestly, why would you need to load manage and go slower in this game when you have 3.5 weeks to rest till the Cotton Bowl? I didn't make sense to me why you would continue to just kind of slow things down from a load management standpoint. So that was a bit of a head scratcher to me. I thought that they would go more up tempo, and they didn't.
Yeah, it's I think just part of it is just it's in their DNA in a way, the way they've played this year.
I think you're right. I think it's that what we just talked about with it.
And I
You know,
wondered
this is
too,
that's their. It's like it's what they're used to now.
just how they've played, and I think the other part of the equation too is how healthy are Smith and Tate. You talked about the times where Tate was not in those red zone sequences. I think that was probably partly more to being in heavy personnel than anything. But certainly those guys are back from injury recently. They are not at full strength, and so a slower tempo helps them. And as we saw against Rutgers, when those two guys are out, there are not a ton of receiver options. So if you're trying to play this fast pace, go 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 kind of offense, you just don't have a lot of guys, and on that second group of receivers to rotate in for Jeremiah and Carnell. We have not seen a ton of production from that second group. The Bryson Rogers, the Milan Grahams, Quincy Porter, a freshman, has been out with an injury for most of the second half of the season, if not all of it. He was again out in the Big Ten title game. They just don't have a lot of their fourth, fifth receiver is not somebody who's going to come in and where you're going to feel great about Julian saying chucking it all over Lucas Oil Stadium against the number one defense in the country, or number one red zone defense, but as good as Ohio State's.
Yeah, I agree. Some confusion there. And the other thing that I didn't quite buy while we're into this, what I'm wondering about is Ryan Day went out of his way to say that Brian Hartline will still be calling plays, and he thought because they had a tough week, but with recruiting and signing day and Hartline, announcing he was leaving, that Ryan Day thought that now having time and 3.5 weeks to prepare for will actually be less because they'll know their opponent here. They'll probably have 2 weeks or a week, whatever that is, to really prepare an offensive game plan where they can really dig down and drill down and be ready for their next opponent, making it sound like they didn't have that opportunity with Indiana. My counter to that is, A, you probably knew it was going to be Indiana. I mean, it's not like Indiana sprung up from nowhere. You would think you'd have been scouting Indiana. It's not like you had no time. I mean, if I'm a little like confused by that whole analogy. I think it was a way of Brian Day to kind of take some pressure off the play calling against Indiana, saying, "Well, there was a lot of stress that week. We couldn't focus 100% on the Hoosiers." Like, did you not kind of pay attention to him prior to the last week?
Well, I think in terms of just demanding your full attention, they are playing Michigan the week before Indiana, so just your full
I get that.
kind of everything is dedicated toward Michigan in a way where Indiana's playing hapless Purdue the week before.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I get that to a certain point. I guess I just saw a little bit of excuse making with the tough week, negatively impacting game planning, which led to
For sure,
sort
but
of a
time.
led. I think that could be true. Maybe it did impact it, but then to not, I was with you to not have Tate and Jeremiah Smith on the field late in that 13 package was like, what are you doing?
I wondered too, did they just think they could kind of bully Indiana in those spots where
Toughness. I'd like to know where Lou Holtz is right now. See
is
what he
that a
has to say.
perception deal where they didn't have maybe the respect? I mean, you're just spitballing, but they wanted to be in
Yeah.
your heavy personnel, and they've done that at times throughout this year. It's sort of a confounding strategy, but at times you do wonder if it's just strategy or is it just a result of the depth chart after Smith and Tate being really thin. And I think that to me has been a concern with that position group all season long is just who could emerge behind them. I think it was really pronounced against Rutgers.
Yeah. Did CJ Donaldson have a carry?
No,
I don't think he did.
it was
Was he even
very
on the?
heavy. It was a very heavy Bo Jackson game. Isaiah West had a couple of carries, and then that was it. It was just Bo and Isaiah, the two freshmen.
Yeah, I didn't get that. I mean, I know Donald's, I mean, he's kind of your battering ram. I'm not even sure he was on the field in those 13 package. I don't think he was. I can't say for sure, but
Well, they have not. It's not as if their situations with Donaldson have been all that much better than when they've had just
no,
and maybe
no,
about the same. What's I think notable perhaps is they didn't try the Lincoln Keenholz package, if you will. Ryan Day was asked about that on Sunday, and he said he gave it some thought, but they have not really shown that in a high stakes game, and it would still kind of surprise me. They've tried that out against Purdue and Rutgers, but are you going to do that in a game of higher magnitude? I mean, this is why too the schedule hurt them this year. I think in some ways, people talked about whether Ohio State had been tested. This was the first time they had trailed in the second half, and really since the Texas game, from Texas all the way to Michigan, there was never a game where you felt like, oh, they could lose this one. And I think it matters for players and it matters for when you put stuff in, just the stakes of it. And
yeah,
it would be
and
I think
maybe I've seen. I'm sorry. Maybe a blessing in disguise as I've gotten a lot of texts and seen some stuff on that of not in a different way than Michigan was, which I don't know if Michigan was a wake up call in 2024 as much as
I
uh, a kumbaya moment where players had to realize we're not all that and the play calling was terrible. From that standpoint, some similarities because I don't think the play calling was great against Indiana. Some of the schemes, and maybe these guys either thought they were the best team in the world, which, I think you would think that in a sense, or just didn't know, to your point. They really didn't play anybody, and so they didn't have a good gauge on really what it takes.
I think it's more like the Oregon loss from last year, where they lost to
Hmm.
Oregon in October, and that forced them to make adjustments on defense from the way they got
Yeah.
play calls quicker. They tried to simplify some schemes in terms of the number of assignments for players. And so it forced them to make some schematic changes rather than the deep soul searching of the loss to Michigan. I think it's going to be more of that where you see them
Yeah.
make some tweaks rather than this come to Jesus meeting at the end of the season and you have to really dig deep and go on this run. I think it doesn't really force that reexamination as much as it does. They have to clearly go back to the drawing board and make some changes for how they perform and deal with some of the game management and red zone situations and just the way they sort of manage the personnel as a whole. They, I think, throughout Day's tenure, have generally done a pretty good job of not wasting losses. You've
Mm.
seen them come back from losses and I think make pretty smart changes on a whole. I don't think this one needs the same wholesale as Michigan, but it's I think more like what we've seen from them in the past after some of those like sort of mid-season losses.
Yeah. And I think it's still possible, whether it's probable, I don't know, that, they have this time off now. So in the Cotton Bowl, maybe it is going to be up tempo and go because at that point, we can see the finish line. We're not saving anything. We're not going to slow it down for load management. We've had 2 weeks off or 3 weeks off to rest, and we're going to be in domes. Well, let me see. Dome in Dallas, dome in Phoenix, correct? If they would win, if they would beat either Miami or A&M, then they would probably play Georgia um, out west in Glendale, and then they would come to Miami for the title game outdoors on grass, but warm. So maybe that's when we see the Indy car. They were in Indy. I thought they'd go Brickyard, go Indy 500 and open it up, and they didn't. It was like, they were on the streets of downtown Indy, stop and go versus at the old Brickyard, let it rip. I was a little surprised by that, but what do you think? Spend a few minutes maybe on what's coming.
A&M or Miami. Miami would be that would be this Jeremiah's runner up. So that would be kind of interesting. And A&M, I think notable they're not going to the Orange Bowl, which there are two options for Ohio State in terms of the bowl sites, and I'll kind of explain that a little bit here quickly. But there were two options for Ohio State's quarterfinal slot. Rose and Sugar were out because those were for the Big Ten and SEC champs. Left the Orange and Cotton. They've not been to the Orange in a while since the 2013 season. They were last there, so it's been 12 years. And they've been in the Cotton Bowl quite a bit lately. Obviously, last year in the semifinal, then the year before that in the year six bowl game as well. And they ended up there because of the A&M Miami first round game that was the winner was going to face Ohio State. And they didn't want to put them in the Orange Bowl because there was a possibility of Miami beating A&M, and that game is played at Miami's home stadium. So they did not want the lower seed to have a clear home field advantage. The Arlington Stadium or AT&T Stadium in Arlington is still in the state of Texas, and presumably there would be more A&M fans. They would have easier access to tickets, or they're at least closer to the stadium itself. But that's still a 3-hour drive from College Station. A lot of the grads live in Houston, so it's at least not the literal home stadium of your opponents. That's why they're in the Cotton Bowl again. So if you were looking forward to maybe going to a new destination or just something different than the Cotton Bowl, you will not get that this year. But maybe it at least won't be ice in Arlington this year. That would be nice.
Yeah, it was a little messy last year, as was Atlanta.
Yeah,
Both bad situations. And you know what? If Ohio State keeps advancing, you get to go out to Phoenix, and then you get to go to Miami after all.
yeah.
Whether you've budgeted for that, you got to be a pretty high roller to attend all these games, or at least the ultimate fanatic fan. So uh, I'm wondering if there's been somebody that does do them all. I'm sure there will
I think
be.
there were last year. I think there were last year for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Anyhow, that should be. I'm sure we'll have another pod on that game as it approaches. Muriel Cristobal, who I'm not a huge fan of as a game coach, and then Mike is it
Elko.
Elko, who I think is pretty good. I think he's pretty good.
Yeah, it'd be an interesting game if it is A&M from one standpoint. Ross Bjork hired Mike Elko right before he left for Ohio State, so he would know both coaches in that game pretty well.
Yeah, that could be an awkward moment for Ross or a homecoming. Could be kind of fun with both
Yeah,
places.
also done a nice job this year. I'm sure they maybe if A&M gives them a close game, you wonder, couldn't you have hired Stoops from Kentucky? Why'd you have to hire?
Why why not James Franklin?
Yeah,
Anyhow, yeah. So some work to do for the Buckeyes, but don't overlook that defense. Again, I think the offense needs maybe a little bit of help here, but the defense has been rock solid all season. Again, held a team that was averaging 43 points to 13, their lowest total, I think, in 2 years. The defense is just fine, and the defense will be fine moving forward, whether it's A&M, Miami, Georgia, Indiana again. The defense will be good. The offense needs, I keep saying if your offense gets you 24 points, 24 points, that's like an almost slam dunk win in the playoff. 21 might get it. But I think with this defense, 24 points from your offense, it'd help if you get a pick six and the defense could help you out. But 24 points wins the national title for you.
yeah, I see it. I think, and the offense I think will be okay. I think it needs an oil change. I think that Indy car, it doesn't need a new engine. It just needs
There you go.
quick servicing trip, and then I think it should be okay for the postseason.
I'm with you.
Thanks
Okay.
everybody for joining us, and we'll be back in your podcast feeds here.
Oh, last thing, Joe, let me jump in. Poor Julian Saying probably lost the Heisman. We didn't mention that. Probably Mendoza, you think? Although the Southern vote could give it to Mr. Vanderbilt.
Yeah, I think still Mendoza.
Okay.
I think the storyline of him, the quarterback of the first ever 13-0 Indiana Hoosiers, I think is just
I'm with you.
too
I'm with you.
compelling of a tale.
Okay.
That's where it ends up. But we'll see if Julian Saint ends up in New York, at least as a finalist. But now we're really gone. That was our addendum to the episode.
Yes.
Thanks for joining us, everybody.